didn't really think that was necessary. All right, I think we're about to be live right now. All right, just get back into the meeting here. I don't know why. Why is it doing this? It's weird. It's asking me to sign into the Zoom for live twice. That's a little strange. Let me just see here. Let me just make sure it's not already live. Okay, yeah, it's live. I don't know why it was doing that. All right, so welcome everyone. I'm Brother Doug with Brother Yahusha's with us tonight, Sister Marissa, Sister Shoshana, Brother Dennis. We are the Wakened by Yahuwah Fellowship and Yahuwah Almighty Yahusha Messiah. I hope everyone's having a great new year. We are just a couple of ways from Pesach, our group. So just want to say I hope everyone, all of our brothers and sisters out there are going to have a great feast season. So tonight, this is going to be an interesting study because tonight is going to deal with the 13th month in the biblical calendar in general. Oh, my bad, Brother Yahusha. I didn't even realize before your hand is up. You wanted to mention something?
Oh, no, that was an old hand. I'm going to put it down. I'm pretty tired.
Okay, no worries, man. No problem. So I want to kind of, I know I'm going to try to do this as brief as I can because I know all of us are getting a little tired here. Let me see here.
I was talking about my hand.
Oh, okay. So let's see here. Those that are familiar with our ministry have seen the prior study we did. What is the scriptural calendar? Or not tithing, but what is the scriptural calendar? So we have two docs I'm going to include for you guys to search for yourselves. If you guys are pretty much familiar with the previous study, this was the previous study. I'll spend a little bit of time here just rehashing this for those that didn't see the previous study. Okay, so we have Psalms 81 verse 3, blow the trumpet at the full moon and the new moon blow the trumpet at the new moon and at the full moon on your feast day. Okay, so it's showing that the full moon is a feast day. And as you go further into the chapter of Psalms 81, like verse 5 specifically, is hinting that the full moon being mentioned is the Passover, not the new moon. So we kind of, I really recommend people watch our first calendar study, the biblical calendar. I really recommend that just so that you can get some context. Okay, so and we also talked about in that study, First Enoch 78 verse 12, when the first light hits the moon, aka the first sliver, it's called the new moon. So those that want to say that Enoch is a solar calendar book, for you to promote that narrative, you have to ignore this verse. Okay. So obviously the book of Enoch is actually promoting a luni solar calendar, not a solar only. Okay. So, and also we have a couple of verses from Exodus 12 here detailing what the meaning of Abib is. And this is important to understand because this is where people get confused and think you're supposed to calculate the new year by using the stage of the grain. Even if you are, they are looking at the wrong stage, to be honest, because most of those in Israel, not saying everyone, but most of those in Israel that are looking at the grain and calling the new year by the grain, they are calling it when the grain is at a very baby stage, which is not what scripture considers Abib. Okay. If you look at the Septuagint, it says new or new grain, depending on the translation. Okay. So, and Joshua 3:15, I have a note here that says grain is not actually there in the Greek, but it's implied. Okay. Leviticus 23 verse 14, Targum of Pseudo-Jonathan. They paraphrase Abib as ripened grain, ripe, meaning it's at an adult stage, a mature stage. It's not green. Okay. So it also agrees with the Septuagint definition of Abib. And here you go. You got it mentioned again. Okay, Leviticus 23:15. Jonathan and Onkelos, the Sabbath being mentioned is first fruits, aka the first yom of unleavened bread. Okay, so what does this mean? It means that you are supposed to start your counting of the 50 days to Pentecost on the 16th of Abib after the first day of unleavened bread. So when it says the morrow after the Sabbath, the Septuagint and the Targums are interpreting the word Sabbath there as the high Sabbath, not the weekly Sabbath. Okay. Okay, so again, Leviticus 23:16, count 50 days of Pentecost. Okay, there's no reiteration we need to do there. Okay, so moving on, in there, we know that we're supposed to be keeping these in their appointed times, hence why there's so many calendar debates, because we want to make sure we're keeping the feasts in their times. Leviticus 23, verses 4 to 11. Okay. Psalms 104:19. He made the moon for appointed times, not the sun or the stars. So what does this mean? It means that the moon is the sign of feasts. So if we go to Genesis 1:14, you'll see that it talks about the lights are to be given as the sign of the Moedim. Now, a good point that my brother Yahusha brought up off the record to me was that nowhere in Genesis 1 does it say to use barley or any type of grain to determine the year. Okay, so you have Yahuwah saying that you determine my appointed times with the lights of the heavens. Okay. Nowhere in the Torah does it say we are, and this is a pretty important one here. This is where people get confused and think they got to go by Jerusalem for the sighting of the moon. I do have a note here. Nowhere in the Torah does it say we are to go by Jerusalem time for sighting the moon. When we keep the Sabbath, do we use our time zone for sunset or Jerusalem's? Question mark. Okay. Isaiah 2 verse 3 is a millennial context. Okay. First Enoch 72:32, on this day it's equal day and equal night. The equinox, now just to explain, because I don't want anyone thinking I'm trying to deceive anyone, okay? Even though it doesn't exactly say the vernal equinox is the last day of the year, it just says on this day it's equal day and equal night. The reason I believe that it is not just based on what Enoch says about the equinox. It's based on what we know about the vernal equinox. The vernal equinox is supposed to be the last day of winter. It's supposed to end winter. And we know that according to historically what the Hebrews would have understood Abib as, Abib is supposed to be spring. It's supposed to be when things are growing again, when trees are having their leaves come back, when all this, that's when Abib historically would have started. They would not be keeping the new year in the dead of winter. So hence why you would have to wait for the equinox. If it's true that the equinox, I'm using a hypothetical here, that the equinox is the last day of winter, you can't start the year before the vernal equinox. And obviously we use the new moon because the moon has been given for appointed times for the months. Okay, so just moving on here, just explaining that there, why I believe it's the last day of the previous year. First Enoch 73:4, and thus she rises, her first phase in the east comes forth on the 30th morning, and on that day she becomes visible. Who becomes visible? The moon. And constitute for you the first phase of the moon. So what's the first phase of the moon? The waxing crescent. On the 30th day together with the sun in the portal where the sun rises. Okay. 1 Samuel 25. This is why me personally, why I don't believe in needing to see the moon every time for the new moon. Because I do believe they had some type of calendar where they knew, okay, well, today's this, so the next day is going to be the new moon. Okay. First Samuel 25, David knew the next day was the new moon. So he knew 24 hours ahead of time. It's very possible, like Brother Yahusha has brought up in the past, that they could have somehow, I don't know how they could have saw the conjunction, or maybe they just knew ahead of time that that day was the conjunction. But they obviously knew which phases were on which days, and they knew ahead of time. So my assumption is they had something similar to maybe a farmer's almanac back then, or they had something where they made charts of the moon phases where they paid attention each month. Because just to put it in layman's terms, guys, when you go by a lunar calendar, right, month to month, it's going to be 2930, 2930, 2930. So if they're memorizing, right, which months are supposed to have 29 days and which months are supposed to have 30 days, they would know ahead of time, without actually looking for the moon. Am I saying it's bad to look for the moon? No, I would never say that, because the Hebrews did that a lot. They would they would look in the sky for the waxing crescent. So I'm not saying it's bad to do that. Also, since we're on the topic of the crescent, I wanted to talk about some historical proofs of it, by the way, that you guys can go to for yourselves. You can double check me. Basically, we have witness of Philo. Philo, who lived around the same time as Yahusha, mentioned that their new moon was the crescent, not the dark moon, and that they went by that type of calendar. And I'm trying to remember the other one. I know there was two witnesses historically of it. I know Philo was one of them. I would have to go back. Yahuwah willing, I'll try to find that for you guys. Now, I want to express this and be honest with you guys. This book that I'm about to reference, I am referencing for a historical, cultural reason. I'm not saying it's scripture or that it is scripture, because I don't know. I haven't fully tested this book yet. Okay? Just want to make that very clear. What I am saying, though, is showing historically and culturally what type of calendar they kept. Okay? This is a Hebrew pseudepigraphal extra biblical book known as Sirach or Ecclesiasticus, chapter 43, verses 6 to 8. He made the moon to serve in what? Her season, for a declaration of times and a sign of the world. From the moon is the sign of feasts, not the sun, the moon. A light that decreases in her perfection. The month is called after her name, and I'll explain after that this is historically accurate. Whether, like I said, whether this book is inspired or not, that's another story. But anyway, increasing wonderfully in her changing, being an instrument of the armies above, talking about the messenger armies, the hosts in heaven, okay, shining in the firmament of heaven. And that's from Brenton's 1851 translation of the LXX Apocrypha. So Sirach is also known as Ecclesiasticus if you have a Catholic Bible, okay? So I'm just referencing that as a extra biblical, cultural, historical witness to what Philo believed, to what we see in the book of Enoch as well, and what we see in the Bible. So you have at least 3 or 4 witnesses here that it's a lunar calendar. Okay. Now, what I personally believe, going back to Genesis 1 here, I believe that the moon is for months and the sun is for days and years. And somehow, I'm not too sure how the stars work, but I still believe the stars have something to do with the years. I don't know exactly how to explain that, but from this verse, we see that all the lights, the 3 lights of the heavens, the 3 main type of lights are used for Yahuwah's Moedim. Okay, so it says here, let's start at verse 14. And Eluah said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to give upon the earth, to divide day and night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. So seasons, for days, and for years. So that means one of the lights have to be for days, one of the lights has to be for years, and seasons, I would imply, could also mean months as well. It's not just feasts, but months. So we see that the moon month is named after moon etymologically. Okay, you have days, sunset to sunset, sun. Years, supposedly according to Enoch, it would seem the sun is also used for years. I guess the stars and constellations somehow work with the sun. I don't know exactly how that all works. I'm just being honest here, but it would seem that's how to interpret verse 14 there in Genesis 1. Okay. And it goes, and actually verse 16 as well. And Elohim made the two great lights, the sun and the moon, the great light for regulating the day and the lesser light for regulating the night, the stars as well also. So anyone that tells you that the stars is the lesser light, that's incorrect. The stars are being separated from the lesser light. They are not the lesser light. You have the sun, the greater light, the moon, the lesser light, and the stars. So just to explain all that. Reason I'm kind of going quickly is because we have a lot to cover. Go ahead, Brother Yahusha. I don't know. Did was that an old hand? Or I can't tell sometimes.
No, it was a new hand. Just in regarding the stars, it's possible that they can, depending on how often you have that full rotation, because they do rotate just like the sun and the moon. I would say depending on how often they do their full rotation, I would imagine that it's possible to determine where you are in the year, like as far as what month. And I also am beginning to wonder if you could possibly tell where you are in the week. Even though I would say that the Shabbat has never changed and it's always been the day that we keep it. Historically, we can point to that. I would imagine, this is just a theory, I can't prove it, but I would imagine that if he gave the sun, the moon, and the stars as timestamps, that tell us where we are, that there is a way to be able to look up at the sun, moon, and the stars and tell you, okay, we're on day 1 or we're on day 2. Obviously, not like the way that the lunar Sabbatarians do, but a way that would point us to the true seventh day, which is today, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
But maybe we'll never know that,
Yeah. Yeah, I think Yahuwah might tell us when he returns. That might be something he'll kind of sit all of us down and be like, listen, I know you guys have been bickering about this forever. All right, once and for all, I'm going to tell you how this all works, how these lights work together. All right, so, but the reason we brought up Genesis 1 is to prove, regardless how you interpret Genesis 1:14, there's nothing mentioning counting grain. There's nothing mentioning, the beeb is starting to grow, so we need to start the new year. There's nothing in the Bible for that. Those people that want to use verses that talk about that, I want to kind of clear this up in this kind of urban legend that you're supposed to use of the barley. Okay, I'm going to use an article here and actually kind of use it against them here, as the old saying goes. So they actually provide me with the verses that most people want to use from their argument. So we're gonna kind of attack this false belief from their own mindset. Okay, so what they're gonna see means the stage of the grain. You need to go by the stage of the grain. This is usually how their argument works. Okay, so I'm using this ministry's link here. Okay, so let me see here. And these guys, by the way, have a great article, though, on the waxing crescent. I really recommend them for that part of the calendar, for the new moon. That's where I found out about Philo's quote and all that. Okay, so let's see here. So they're talking about, this is where you got to be careful with playing games with dictionaries and lexicons, okay? This is where this belief comes from, okay? So they're using Brown Drivers Briggs Hebrew Lexicon. they look at the word Abib in the Masoretic text, mind you, Masoretic text. Okay, so not the original Hebrew. Okay, and they're getting the idea that it means green Abib. I don't have it on me right now, but just to stop here, Karaite Jews themselves disagree with that definition of the word Abib in the Hebrew. I think if you go at nehemiahswall.com, Nehemiah Gordon, he has a whole article about the King James translators did not know Hebrew that well, and they translated two different Hebrew words for green ears. So as far as that's concerned, there's no proof that Abib even means green ears, other than you going by Brown Drivers Briggs dictionary, you know. But if you want, I can find the link for you guys right now, because I know Nehemiah Gordon has a whole big. And I'm not a fan of his, but I do respect that he's at least honest somewhat about the Hebrew language and how translators have mistranslated things. Go ahead, brother Yahusha.
To your point, I would say that we also have to consider that whether it was Brown Drivers Briggs or whether it was James Strong or whether it was Thayers or whoever, just considering the Hebrew, what they're getting, and I definitely, I'll use Strong's, I use it, but at the end of the day, I have to remember that these definitions are coming from the people in the land. That's who they're getting their definitions from, which is not always going to be 100% accurate, especially considering that the people in the land don't speak Hebrew. They speak Aramaic or Yiddish or whatever you want to call it. So at the end of the day, like I cannot, and it along this same line, I was having I was talking with someone else who was pointing me to Psalms 81, saying that the cup. Well, I'll save that for another time. I'll talk with you later. But even with the Strongs, we have to be careful. We can't always say, okay, this is what it says, so this is what it means. Or even the BDB, even though I like I said, I respect the BDB a lot more than I do the Strongs as well. But if whatever definition they're giving doesn't match the context of what is being said, and then it disagrees with scripture, like this Exodus, I think that's where you're going in Exodus.
Yeah. This is Nehemiah Gordon's Wall, by the way. Nehemiah's Wall. He's got a whole big article about this, how green ears. This is actually what the bead stage actually looks like, guys. It's when it starts getting yellowish, almost golden type of color. That's a bead. Just FYI for those that are interested in knowing what the stage of Abib of the barley actually looks like. Okay. Story of Exodus relates, this day you are going out in the month of Abib, Exodus 13:4. I'm seeing where he starts talking about how green ears is a mistranslation here. So here we go. Exodus 9:31, guys, actually debunks this idea that it's when the barley is just starting to grow. Okay. If you actually look at it, Exodus 9:31, and I'll even go to it, the Septuagint makes it very clear this is when it's in its later stage. Okay, it's in a maturing stage. So those that want to use this scripture, I suggest you look at the Septuagint. Septuagint is going to give you the most accurate definition of the Hebrew word. And so, yeah.
I don't know if you mentioned it at all. Maybe you did, and I wasn't paying attention. But just to make mention that we don't support Nehemiah Gordon by any way, shape, or means, nor believe.
Yeah, no,
at all.
No, not at all, not at all. And yeah, I am only using it for I actually mentioned it a couple minutes ago that I'm not a fan of his. I'm just using it for really cultural, historical purposes, that he knows Hebrew a lot better than the King James makes a little jab even in this article, that King James and his translators did not know Hebrew very well. And that's the reason I'm using this to prove that your Strong's Concordance and your Brown's Drivers Briggs is based on the King James translation. As far as the rendering for Hebrew words, it is not based on like a Paleo Hebrew source or even see, this is what I'm talking about here, where he kind of makes a little jab here. Says, all the above passages have been translated directly from Hebrew. It is worth noting that the King James translators seem to have only understood the various Hebrew agricultural terms very poorly. In Leviticus 2:14, they translated Carmel as full ears and Aviv as green ears, whereas in Leviticus 23:14, they translated Carmel as green ears. So what he's trying to say is they really didn't know. They're guessing. So they're translating the same word as green or full ears, and they're not even being consistent the way they translate the word Carmel. So his point, again, like I said, we don't promote him. I'm just saying he does have a valid point from the Hebrew language perspective. Is the reason I'm sharing this, is that they did not know Hebrew very well. And your Strong's Concordance, by the way, is based on the King James Bible. It's the first ever James Strong Concordance was based on the King James. It was keyed to the King James translation. So a lot of your definitions you're looking at, your Strong's on electronic, is coming from the King James Bible. So that's another thing you got to realize too. So you got to take it with a grain of salt when the Strong's tells you Abib means green ears, that, you know, it's based on a Christian translation that really they did not understand the agriculture in Israel. That's the point he's trying to make, which I would agree with him on that topic. Not most things I don't agree with this guy, but when it comes to the Hebrew language, even the modern Hebrew language, the King James Bible had very little knowledge of understanding agriculture in Israel in the Hebrew language. So his point is that they're translating the same word Carmel two different times as two different words. And so they don't even know what Carmel means. They can't even be consistent whether they think it's full ears or green ears. So anyway, that was kind of the point. So as you can see, going back to Exodus 9:31, he lists as well. If you look in the Septuagint, which he didn't even give, by the way, because I don't think he's pro Septuagint, but anyway, if you look at Exodus 9:31 from the Septuagint, and the flax and the barley were smitten, for the barley was advanced. So by default, that cannot mean it's in a beginning stage if it's advanced. And the flax was seeding. So why are we pointing this out? When, Mom, did the Exodus take place on the biblical calendar? Passover, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that means by the time Passover hit, the barley would have had to be at a advanced stage, not a green ear stage, an advanced stage. So that's kind of the point. So anyway, so just kind of, you know, to make people understand why I'm using this. And again, I want to reiterate, I don't promote this guy. I'm not saying he's a brother. He's just a Jewish Karaite in Jerusalem that knows about their agriculture. That's the only reason I'm using him. So let me just go back here. I think we did most of the first document. Now I want to go into the second document, try to skim through it here. Calculating the biblical calendar. Okay, so, or the biblical year. Okay, so I have a little note here that says the new year will always be either in the month of March or April. Now, also, I want to mention also, guys, that you should not be having Abib in February, and I'll tell you why. Even in the worldly calendar, before the Gregorian calendar, this is a historical fact, guys. You can check it for yourself. A historical fact that the 12th month was always February. So let me just explain. Before you had the Romans changing the new year to Janus, okay? It's the only reason they changed the New Year's because they worship Janus, the god of doorways and the gates and all that, okay? Before that, even the whole world understood February was the last month. It was always the 12th month. So let me explain. So, right, you got March was month one some years. You had April as month one some years, but you always have it start in the spring. So by the time you get to the fall, September is what? What is September, Mom? Or the etymology of the word sept, right? 7. Okay. September 7. October 8. November 9. Okay. Dec 10. So that means whatever January originally was named was the 11th month. Hence, 4th, that means February, always the 12th, every year. So now, I think this is where the body of Yahusha needs to be on the same page on. You should never be starting a bee before March, ever. So if you have a calendar that is making you start, let's say you start a Beeb on February 20th or 29th or whatever, whenever's the last day of February, that there has to be some issue with a calendar that's causing you to do that, okay? You should always start your new year in March or April, okay? So historically, we know that for a fact. We know that's originally, that's what the months were. That's the order of the months, okay? We know that from a historical standpoint. Okay. Some years there will be an extra 13th month due to the equinox sometimes hitting before the new moon of Abib. So what do I mean by this, right? We go by the new moon, right, for our months. So let's say, obviously, you're not going to start the new year on the last month of the year, right? Okay. So the reason we wait for the first new moon after the equinox is so that you're starting the new year with a new month, not with the same month. This is the best way to explain it. I can explain it to people in layman's terms. Okay. The reason you have a 13th month every other year is because there's certain years where you'll have that 12th new moon, and then 2-3 days later or what have it, you have the equinox. So if the equinox is the last day of winter, that ends the winter, right? Then you have to count the first new moon after the vernal equinox. Now, people will be telling me, again, like, how do I know that you can't start the year, on the equinox? I can't tell you for sure that I don't, that you're not supposed to do that. All I can tell you is that in my personal opinion, I doubt Yahuwah would want us to start the year on when the winter ends on that specific day. I seriously doubt he would want us to end the year and start the year on the same day. I just don't see it. So that's one of the main reasons I believe what I believe about the calendar is that by default, if we're right about the vernal equinox being the last day of the previous year, you have to wait for the next month, or you have to wait at least a day after that. Ideally, guys, I believe personally before, the flood, that it could have been as simple as this. You could have had some years where the new moon is the day after the equinox, and it could have been like that. But people that usually bring up the 364-day thing, I just want to mention this too. Nowhere in the book of Enoch or in scripture does it verbatimly say you have to start the year, or no, I'm sorry, not start the year, but you have to have 364 days in every single year. The book of Enoch does not tell you that. The verse that people are quoting from says that these are the days of the year. This calculates the year, 364 days. That's all it says. But what people are not understanding is you're looking at that, taking away and ignoring that it's a pre-flood context, number one. No, number one, what Enoch's being given as the calendar is a pre-flood context, meaning that even if it was, let's say, I'm wrong and it was 364 days every single year. That's before the flood happened. That's before the earth changed and all that. That's before you even get in the same book, no less. There's a prophecy about that there's the seasons, the Moedim, the seasons would not appear at their times, or the signs of the heavens would not appear at their times. If that's talking about the feast, guys, that means that the calendar is going to be off a little bit. It's not going to be a fixed, perfect calendar. So those that want to say 364 days every single year, fixed calendar, there's no way that's possible if you believe the whole book of Enoch is scripture. If you're not cherry picking, if you're taking the whole book as scripture, then you have to take the whole book in context, which means that at some point in time, the calendar would change because the luminaries are not appearing at the right times. The seasons are not happening at the right times. Eventually, that's going to change. So, Brother Yahushua had a great question for me about the 13th month. Like, how do we explain why there's a gap? With this 13th month, there would be a gap of 29, 30 days between the equinox and the new moon of Abib. The best way I could explain it is that verse that talks about the seasons would be off in the end times. We're in the end times. If the seasons are off, that means the days might be off. That means you might need to have some way to calculate for the days being off. And Enoch as well. I don't have it on me on hand, but I will try to find for you guys the verses from Enoch that show that not every year is 364 days. So like I said, you have to take the whole book of Enoch in context. Because later on in that same book, it talks about 1 year is going to be this amount of days. The next year is going to be this amount of days. So it's not a fixed calendar, guys, is what I'm trying to tell you. Yahuwah's calendar never was a fixed calendar as far as what we know of and what we have the availability of. Now, could you argue that before the flood, it was a 364 days every year? Yeah, possibly you could argue that. But again, we don't have proof of that either. We just have that one isolated verse that says this calculates the days of the year. That's all it says. It doesn't say this forever is going to be the amount of days every year you're going to have. So we have to be careful not to add to the book of Enoch like sometimes we'd be adding to scripture sometimes and eisegetically putting things into there. So we need to be careful about that too. Okay. All right. So let me try to think if there's anything else we haven't gone through with this. Let's see here. We got obviously First Enoch 72:20-21 is about when the day is equal parts day and night. 12 hours. That's the equinox. Okay. I do have a bullet point here. I just want to mention. According to the secular calendars predating the Gregorian, the 12th month of the year, hence Abib, cannot be in February, so we already talked about that. Sorry about rehashing that. All right, so we already talked about that. According to Scripture, months are to be started by the new moon, not the sun. Psalms 104, verse 19 says he appointed the moon for appointed times for Moedim, not the sun. Okay. Some will argue you need to look at the grain, so we already talked about that there's nowhere in Scripture ever that tells you to go by the barley or any type of grain. Okay. Problem is there is no mention of this custom prior to Judaism in history or the scriptures, i.e., it's a tradition of man. Secondly, if you use the equinox and wait for the new moon following the equinox, the grain in Israel would be at the ripe Abib stage by default. Even the secular world understands the vernal equinox marks the end of winter. So what I mean by March 17th or 16th on the document here is, guys, depending on your latitude and longitude, not everyone has the equinox on the same day. We're all spread out around the earth, right? So we're all spread out. So depending on your, I think it's latitude, it's going to depend which day is the equinox for you. So that's why I have on the document March 16th or 17th. So either way. So trying to think, is there anything else? So we talked about the 13th month, we talked about the grain thing, we talked about the
Um,
moon.
with the equinox landing, depending on where you're scattered to, with it landing on a um, different date, depending on where you're at. Um, and even though I mentioned this before, I'm still not 100% certain about it, and it make it because someone else brought it up, and it just I honestly I keep going back and forth between the equinox and the equilux. I'm really unsure. So with the equilux, if because the equilux is going to be different based off of the longitude and latitude, then technically someone in way down in the bottom of South America um, could have a month start before us. Yes or no?
Yeah, technically. I mean, technically, either way, I think you're going to have not everyone starting the month at the same time because I mean, you're going to have the same new moon possibly, but yeah, the vernal equinox is not ever going to be the same day for everyone. I just don't see how that, whether you talk about equilux or equinox, the day that's equal day, equal night is never going to be the same for someone that is in Australia versus someone that's here. I mean, just
Right.
impossible.
Because I was
You
looking
know,
at people that are down in like the very, very way down south, and they would be, I believe their equilux hit the, I would say, um, when did the equilux hit for us? It was in March 17th, right?
I had 16th. You might have had 17th.
Okay.
Um,
For way down
so
south, they had like the 11th or the 12th. Now, let's say if they had it on the 11th, right? And there was a new moon that happened to fall on the 12th. However, our equinox didn't hit until the 16th. So then their new moon fell right after the equinox, and this is just hypothetical because it didn't. But if their new moon fell right after the equinox, but our equinox didn't start until, you know, 3 days after that new moon, then even though they would start a Abib, then we would still wait until next new moon.
mhm.
Is there, do you see any issue in scripture with that, or would that still fall in line with the seasons won't come in at their proper time, and because of us being scattered, all our calendars are off, and some of us are starting a Abib a month sooner than others?
Yeah, well, I would say well, no matter where you are, if you're not waiting for a new moon to start your year, you're definitely going to be a month early. Like those that started that use the sun only in their calendar, they're always going to be a month early, no matter
No,
where you
I'm
are.
not talking about them. I'm talking about people
Okay.
that, because we have people that like us, like our equinox
Mhm.
is on the 16th, but you have people way down south that their equinox was
Hmm.
like 5 days before us. And so
Huh.
technically, like way down south, the equinox hits at like the 10th or the 12th. And
Okay.
you between that time period from like the 10th to the 16th, it is possible for a new moon to fall in between that time. So
Huh.
between their equinox and between our equinox, you can have a new moon fall in. So technically, on that new moon, they could call a bead because it's a new moon following the equinox, and yet our equinox has not hit yet.
Huh. True. True, I guess. I've never talked to anyone that ever experienced that. I guess that's possible, but from what I've seen, I would say, especially in our country, as far as countrywide, we're only a couple of days from one another in different states. So we would still relatively, maybe not a whole month away, but relatively, yeah, we would have a difference of a couple of days. But I would say in other countries, yes, it's going to be a month. I don't think that's an issue because, quite frankly, Yahuwah gave the Torah to his people in one place. So he also intended for us to be together and not have these issues. And Yahuwah knows that we have these issues now being scattered. And I would say that's a little extra mercy period right now. So even if we do, as long as our Abib is roughly between March and April, I think that's the goal. That's
Right.
the goal. As long as you're starting your year in spring, I would say that would be the a reachable, obtainable goal for the calendar. If you're, like I said, if you're somehow you're going by the equinox every year for your new year, and I don't know how it happens, but some years I've seen people have it in February, like the last week of February, and I still don't get how that happens. That I still can't figure out. Even with using the vernal equinox, you should not start your new year any earlier than the 16th or 17th of March. So I don't even know how the February thing happens because I've heard people that have done it in February. I'm like, I don't know how that. I don't know. I would have to talk to someone that's done it and get their reasoning behind why they would do it on like February 28th or 27th and how that works because as far as I know, and Brother Dennis here, he has a Farmer's Almanac, so he'll tell you, every year the equinox is almost the same day. There's no way you're going to get it in February. So even those that
The
are
the,
going,
the equinox is the same day. The equilux, I don't think it's the same day.
okay.
I'm looking at it right now. The spring equilux for 10 degrees north of the equator falls on March 8th, where we're at about 30 to 35 to anywhere between like around 30 to say 50, 60 degrees north of the equator would land you about March 16th, March 17th, about when we keep it. But you go way, farther down, like 5 degrees north is going to land, 5 degrees north of the equator is going to land you February 24th. 10 degrees north is going to land you March 8th.
Hmm.
I'll send this to you.
Wow. Hmm. Yeah, that could be actually used as an argument for us why you can't just start it at the equinox because then if you're at a certain part of the world, you will be starting it in February. You will be starting the new year in February. So I would say that's one of the reasons I think if even if we're remotely at different times and not exactly on the same exact day or month, at least if you go by the first moon after the equinox, no matter where you live, there's no way you're going to have your new year in winter. It completely it avoids it by doing that. Because let's say, right, their vernal equinox was what you said, February 24th or what have it. If you wait for that next new moon, you're going to be in March by default. So, in my personal opinion, this is just opinion here, waiting for the new moon after the equinox avoids that. It completely, without the new moon, you could possibly, depending on where you live on the earth, is what me and Brother Yahusha are talking about. Where you live on the earth could depend on whether that equinox could be still in winter. So you could technically be starting your new year on February 24th rather than waiting to March. If you wait for the new moon after the February 24th, you're in March by default. So to me, waiting for the new moon kind of gets rid of that problem in a way. it kind of gets rid of the problem where we might not be all at the same time. Some might be in March, some might be in April, but at least we're all keeping it in spring, is my point. We're all keeping it, we're all keeping it around the same time. We're not, having people still in the end of winter having the new year, So that's one of the reasons I don't believe in starting the year at the vernal equinox. If you started right at the equinox where you live, depending where you live on the earth, you could start it in winter, possibly. And so that's I guess that would be one of my arguments for waiting for the new moon after the equinox. So anyway, hopefully that makes some sense. But the point is we're never going to have it. And this is why I don't harp so much on the calendar. We vaguely ever do studies about the calendar. And this is why, because I don't want people to think I'm like misjudging them. Okay. I'm just trying to say this is from what I see from scripture. There's other calendars out there that you kind of have to rely and put an unhealthy level of trust in that are not scripture. And to me, that provides a problem. And again, if you guys want to know more about why our fellowship does not preach Jubilees as scripture and other stuff like that, and some of the Zadokite fragments we believe are not scripture, I recommend looking on the YouTube page. We did a whole debunking on the Book of Jubilees. I think my brother Yahusha on his YouTube, I could link you guys to him. He's, I think, done one of the Damascus documents, I think. So
it's no longer up. I took that down.
Okay.
I should redo it.
No worries. So guys, anyway, feel free to look into that Jubilees debunking we did, and that will explain to you why I don't believe Jubilees is scripture. By the way, if you guys do believe Ecclesiasticus is scripture and you're trying to follow Jubilees for the calendar, just take note that what I quoted from Sirach completely contradicts Jubilees, just FYI. So just realize too, if you go by Jubilees for the calendar, you have to ignore the book of Sirach, you have to ignore the book of Enoch, you have to ignore the majority of the Israelite history of what type of calendar they kept, quite frankly. And again, if you guys want to, I can go to that ministry's website I had on the screen earlier, and show you some of the links they had to some historical quotes from Philo and all that, if you guys are interested. But anyway, so hopefully this was a baraka for you guys. Before we end, I would like to also give you guys show you guys this video I came across, proof, I guess you could call this historical proof of there being a 13th month, because actually this is literally included in the preface of a 1775 King James Bible. So this was in one of the editions. So here we go. Hopefully this comes through.
All right, guys, so we're here. I got a very special visitation pass to the Vatican, so I can go over my 1775 and 1776 New Testament Bible. I want you to see some of the details I was talking about the other day, the 13 months. I want you to see the first page where there's a really nice inscription here to Prince James, not King James. Plus the original owners, this Bible right here was owned by a gentleman who was part of the Revolutionary War. And I'll tell you the story about it as well tonight. So I actually had a few people say that the way I handled this Bible, I made it look like it was a copy, it's disrespectful, blah, blah, blah. This Bible right here, if you see how thick it is, it's not made like the new Bibles out of thin Bible paper. This is real paper. This is like hardcore paper. So it's durable, and it's lasted since 1775. The cover has come off, unfortunately, so let me put that down. And I'm just going to bring you through a couple of the details in here that I think are really amazing. This right here is the most important page because it's the main page of the Bible. I'll let you see it right here. The Holy Bible containing the Old and New Testaments, translated out of the tongues, translated out of the original tongues, and with the former translations diligently compared and revised. By His Majesty's special command, appointed to be read in churches, Cambridge, 1775. So that's page 1. But I want you to see what I think is even more important, which is this right here. This right here, let's see if I can just hold it for you guys to read this. But look at that main title, To the Most High and Mighty Prince.
Yeah, no, I don't want that part. I want actually the part that he's going to be showing. Here we go. This is the point, guys. Just ignore what he just said. I had to stop him because I don't believe in giving King James that exalted title.
And as you go one by one, you realize that they're sharing months to call these months. Now, what is intercalary? Because Vader 13, intercalary. Maybe that's the one.
Hold on. Those of you that use Enoch for the calendar will be familiar with that term. There is something in the book of Enoch called intercalary days, right? Interestingly enough, that King James introduction or preface, whatever you want to call it, calls it an intercalary month. So I'm just saying, guys, I think this is something that archaeologically, historically can be proven for the 13th month.
One day. Ooh. It's not 13 months, guys. It's 12 months, 28 days apiece, and then Vader is the 1 day a year to get us to 365. I think that's what that is. All right, guys, there's so much to unravel.
Well, I would disagree because it wasn't 365. It was 364. I would disagree with the speaker there. It actually is a extra month. It would not be listing all the months and then having Vader as a day. That would make no sense. Go ahead, Brother Yahusha.
I was gonna say something else. However, what you just said brought up something completely different to mind. Just in it not being 365, when we get to Daniel and we get to him, he talks about the 3.5 years and 3.5 years for the total of 7. I think what he gives 1,290 days for the 3.5, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so 12. He says 3.5 years is 1,290 days. So when you divide that, let's see, 1,290 divided by 3.5, 1,290 divided by 3.5. That's not even that's 368.5 days, right? So even in his time, the seasons were jacked up.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And mind you, we're talking about, guys, 600 BC for context. We're talking about thousands of years ago. We're talking about what Christianity calls the intertestamental time period is what Brother Yahusha is referring to. Way back then, the months were jacked up, okay, as far as days-wise, okay? It wasn't 364 every year. And actually, brother, if you could help me out and find that verse for me, that would really be good because I know we have brothers and sisters that truly believe that it's 364 every year, and that would really prove that it can't be because then you would have Enoch. If you truly believe Enoch saying that, then you have Enoch disagreeing with Daniel. And then you have a huge issue there. And so I think that was a good reference you could bring up. If we could possibly find where exactly in Daniel it says that, because actually I got to find that Ezekiel reference as well.
I know Daniel 12 and 11 talks about the 1,290 days.
Okay.
Now, Ooh, let's see. Daniel 9. Let's see. Okay.
Yeah, I just need some water.
Signing of a peace treaty between the anti. I'm gonna send this to you. This might be to do a separate side study when we kind of have a little bit more of this. However, I'm just gonna send you this link. Maybe we can find what we are looking for on here. Where's the chat? I'll just send it into the chat.
Okay. All right. So in the meantime, I want to look at Ezekiel 4 here. And it says that for just the house of Israel, he's laying on his side for 390 days. Okay. So we have that. This is after you have finished lying down again, this time on your right side, and bear the sin of the house of Judah, I have assigned you 40 days, a day for each year. Turn your face toward the siege of Jerusalem, and with bared arm prophesy against her. I will tie you up with ropes so that you cannot turn from one side to the other until you have finished the days of your siege. Take wheat and barley, beans and lentils, millet and spelt, put them in a storage jar, make bread for yourself. You are to eat it for 390 days. You lie on your side. Then it starts talking about the weight of the shekels, yada, yada, yada. I saw someone do a video about this recently, and they talked about how if you look at all the days that he's supposed to do that, even the 40 days every year, if you calculate that, the only way to get those exact days for him to fulfill what Yahuwah tells him to do, you have to have a 13th month. And if I can, guys, I'll try to find the exact verse for you guys, because I respectfully, I don't want to promote that ministry. So I'll have to find the verse for you guys and put it in the comments section for you guys to test for yourself. But I recently found out in the book of Ezekiel, in that chapter, if you follow the days he has to lie on both of his sides and all that, you have to have a 13th month for that to be fulfilled. So if we're to take even prophecy and look at the days of prophecy, just like we look at Daniel, it would seem like the calendar is not a fixed calendar. If you have Ezekiel doing a 13th month there, you have Daniel, according to a brother.
I have to correct myself on Daniel. Daniel does talk about a 1290-day period. Okay. However, as far as the 3.5, he refers to the 1260 days as the first 3.5 years, which divided by 3 would be a 360-day year. And technically, those that believe in a 364-day, they could use that against us, because the Hanuk also talks about the 4 intercalary days. So I don't really think we can use Daniel there. But then to point out in Hanuk that it says at the end times, the time would be I don't know, Daniel, the 360 days, the 1290, or the 360, you know what I'm talking about, just the whole timeline in Daniel and comparing it to Revelations. That would be an interesting study. But yeah, I can't use that. It seems that the 1290 days is the second 3.5 year period. So he's first, it's like a 360 days plus an extra 30. So I'm not quite sure why he refers to the first 3.5 years as 1260, but the second 3.5 years as 1290. possibly you have a leap year there, like a 30-day extra
Yeah.
month.
Yeah, I mean, technically that shows that not every year has the same amount of days, unless Yahuwah has given him an extra 30 days for something. That's the only way I could see someone debunking that for us using that. Other than that, it at least shows that from your point of view that of that verse that even with that prophecy, not every year is 364 of the 7 years. So that would kind of go along with what we were talking about. If that's the case, and just naturally there's 30 more days in the last 3 years, which again would go with what Enoch says actually in context of certain year being a certain amount of days, another year being another amount of days. So I was curious to see. Also, it could be something to do with the abomination of desolation. It looks like possibly why it's a little bit longer. Let me see here. This is something about the removal. Yeah, and from the time of the removal, the perpetual sacrifice. So this is talking about the. Oh, my bad, guys. My audio was off for a second. So it says from the time of the removal of the perpetual sacrifice. This is when the beast gets rid of the priesthood. When the abomination of desolation shall be set up, there shall be 1,290 days. So someone could make the case that the extra 30 days is because the perpetual sacrifice. Something I never thought of too that goes along with Enoch in prophecy as well as that Yahuwah says the days will be shortened. Yahusha talks about, for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Now, to me, that would seem like then you have a alteration somewhat to the days of the year then. If these days are shortened. I mean, I guess you could take it on a spiritual type of thing, but I think it's more talking about flesh being saved, in context. So it seems to be talking in a literal sense that the days are going to be shortened. So I think that could also hint around to that Yahuwah knows himself. He spoke through the prophets to warn us that these days are the days and the times are going to be off. And so, but anyway, so that would be my argument to those that say it has to be 364 every single year. Number two is that nowhere in Enoch or the Bible it says that. And so even in Enoch's day, when he's being given that, and he says this sums up the days of the year, that's all it says. It does not say every year has to be a fixed calendar. Like Yahuwah never verbatimly word for word told Enoch that his calendar is a fixed calendar. He never said that. So again, this to a certain level, and again, I'm not trying to attack brothers and sisters that think differently. That's fine. This is not a salvational issue. I just want to preface that. But it is still an issue of what Christianity even will call eisegesis or eisegetical understanding, when you're psychologically adding to the text and you're assuming things that's not there. And all of us are guilty of it. We've all done it, guys. I'm not attacking anyone. We've all done it in our lives. So, let's just be honest here. So, but the point is that nowhere does Yahuwah even not just like deliberately, even so we also have to. Yep, go ahead. I don't know if.
Old head.
Okay. But that's all I'm trying to say, guys, is that we got to be careful when we're studying this stuff out. We have to look at what we have available to us and make our best guess on this stuff. Okay. And again, like I just want to reiterate, when you go by the Bible as your foundation, as the measuring stick, there's only one type of calendar you can really go by. It has to be a luni-solar type of calendar. It cannot be solar only. It has to involve the moon. It has to. So if not, I mean, that's fine if you don't want to involve the moon, but then you have to be honest with yourself and say that you're trusting apocryphal literature like Jubilees, certain Zadokite fragments or whatever, that you're putting that above Yahuwah's word. And at that point, we're just as guilty as the Pharisees at that point. I mean, be quite frank. I'm not trying to attack you guys. I'm just being honest with you. As warning, you don't want to be like the Pharisees and start doing the tradition of the elders and the tradition of their fathers and putting it before Yahuwah's word. So this is the time of the year for us to this is the time of year for us to get leaven out. So that's all I'm going to say, guys. This is a time for us to retrospectively look into ourselves, not just about the calendar, but all of our doctrine, not just sin, but leaven of doctrine. Okay. But anyway, guys, have a great rest of your night. Have a great Shabbat, everyone. Thank you for staying with us. I know we made this kind of a late study, but thank you for staying on with us. Shabbat Shalom.